And we are live. What is up, wrestling fans? I'm Doug.
And I'm Kevin, and we're kind of getting ready to kick off the holidays here, Doug, on the Two Bros Wrestling Show. We're going to take people back. We're going down memory lane in our main event tonight. We're talking Thanksgiving, Starrcade. That was a big deal back in the day.
Back in the day, it was indeed a big deal until the WWE forced a move on Starrcade away from Thanksgiving to Christmas, but I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah, so if you are fans of Starrcade and remember those days, stay tuned. This is the show for you. You've tuned in on a good night, so thank you guys for joining us, Doug. But I guess if we're going to get to the main event, we probably should start with an opening bell.
Opening bell. Ah, there it is. There it is.
I got it right this week.
That's okay. I'm back at the computer so I can actually use the banners again instead of trying to fumble on my phone.
Yeah, first, I guess we should thank everybody who stuck with us with our technical difficulties last Sunday. And we had a special Monday show about wrestling presidents. So if you didn't see that special Monday show, it's here in the archives. Check it out. Doug and I accurately predicted everything that was going to happen this week. So. So definitely go check that out. Doug, if you want, I'll just jump into some news for us here.
Hey, let's do it.
Really, I think that probably in the wrestling world, the main news this week, if everyone needs a break and wants some wrestling news, is the Kaylee Ray retired. And Kaylee Ray has had some issues in her brief career. And she's currently with Impact Wrestling, and she announced on Monday, right before our show, and I didn't find out until our show was done, but I did post a little something on our Facebook page about it, wishing her well. But she has been dealing with some mental health issues, and is very sad. A couple weeks ago when Impact had a pay-per-view, she no-showed. They didn't know where she was. She was actually the challenger for the women's world title and no-showed that pay-per-view. And Doug, I know you'll remember, and a lot of wrestling fans will remember, she had a brief cup of coffee with AEW in kind of almost similar circumstances with no shows and things like that. But apparently in a post on Monday, she mentioned that she was no longer considering herself a professional wrestler and that she wasn't well. Obviously with all we know about, all we know today about mental health issues and the lack of mental health funding and all these sorts of things, someone coming forward like that, serious situation. And we definitely wish first that she gets better, whether she ever wrestles again or moves on to whatever the next phase of her life is. We wish the best for Kaylee Ray.
Absolutely. Just a side note, didn't that brief cup of coffee she did have with AEW, wasn't there a similar situation there where she left the biz altogether only to resurface on the indies a few weeks or months later, like getting things back together again, and then going at it, ended up at Impact, and now she's, it looks like it's best for her to just step away from the business for the time being, at least. So,
and as we know from we often report on the scripted side of things and the backstage side of things and the booking side of things, but the real world stuff that creeps in is just as serious as in any personal or professional lives. Earlier this year we had the incident where we had a young female performer, take her life over mental health issues and bullying and other such things. So it is kind of ironic, I guess, that Kaylee Ray's character on air is that of a very for those who haven't seen the Kaylee Ray character, think old school Bailey.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Old school Bailey fits it best. Yeah. Absolutely.
Little girl, always smiley collie. That's kind of the nickname. And so there's just terrible irony, really, to the fact that she's dealing with some issues. So definitely get well. And maybe wrestling isn't the best platform for that, because as we saw again with the star over in Japan earlier this summer, wrestling fans can be cruel, and unfortunately there's an aspect of that online and things. So maybe it's just much healthier for Kaylee Ray right now to just take time to heal and leave the spotlight. And less, serious news, we'll go to some lighter fare. But Doug, reportedly WWE is looking for something different. And I put that in quotes because that's exactly the way that the story reads, that they're looking for something different for Royal Rumble this year. And what that something different is, at least according to this one source, is having fans, a large number, at least compared to what WWE's been doing, which has been no fans, live for this event. As you know, we're in the era in WWE where they're doing that Thunderdome concept, and apparently they foresee doing that Thunderdome concept at least through February, definitely for the foreseeable future. So that would take us through Royal Rumble. But supposedly Vince does not want to do Royal Rumble in the Thunderdome setup, and that they may be looking for some way to try to start, at least for some of the bigger events, to bring in fans for that. So stay tuned. And speaking of Thunderdome, Doug, WWE extended their contract with the Amway Center there in Orlando through November 24th. Originally, that was supposed to end last month. So we're actually getting down to within the last few weeks of them being there. And this time there will be no extension because the NBA is getting ready to start back up, and the team in Orlando uses that arena. So WWE is going to have to vacate. So supposedly the word is, because the Thunderdome setup is, been successful for them, that they're going to take that on the road, that they're apparently looking at another arena that doesn't have a sports team that they won't have to vacate for. They're looking for a place that's modern. Some of the older buildings apparently doesn't have the infrastructure to hold the massive Thunderdome setup. Apparently it's very heavy, so you have to have just the right place. Supposedly they're looking elsewhere in Florida, but also apparently are looking at North Carolina, Illinois, and Texas as other places that they can optionally set up the Thunderdome for a few more months.
That's interesting. I like the idea of the Thunderdome as a gimmick, but the Dystopian Tribunal always kind of freaks me out with all those screened faces and everything. But I think we're getting to a point. I mean, when this pandemic started so long ago, it's like 17 years ago when this first began at this point.
Right.
It seemed like we're in a much worse place now than we were, but yet places are opening up. I mean, I know New Japan is going to have, they'll have the Tokyo Dome this year again for their Wrestle Kingdom over 2 days, and it will be the largest wrestling audience to date. I mean, of course, they're not going to fill the Tokyo Dome on either night, but they will have enough to scatter people about. And we see that with Daly's Place, with what AEW does there. I think if precautions are taken, you can probably do it safely.
And there's other concerns too, really. I think they probably ended up selling out, but it was kind of a news story that the AEW was trying to expand the number of people that they bring in for this most recent pay-per-view. And, previously they would sell out every pay-per-view. Right. And when they were having, full arena shows. Sure. And this one didn't sell out. Like, they still had tickets remaining, even though it was limited capacity. So there's also now starting to be the concern that if you have to stay in one place for on a weekly basis, that you burn out the town. Like, there's only so many people that are traveling and doing those sorts of things now. So your audience you're trying to get there is typically from the local area, and they can just go any week that they want, and it's not as much of an event. And so if you try to have a lot of people at these things at a place that you've been set up at for 8-9 months, you might not get it. So I think this is actually an interesting topic. One, I think that we should probably explore in a show later on, because as we mentioned in our most recent episode, MLW is getting ready to kick off their TV product, so everyone will be back on air. And I think it'd be a good time, at this point in the pandemic, where we've seen different strategies tried, to kind of look at what each promotion's doing, because they're all doing it differently. They have to, but they're all doing it differently from each other. And as you were talking about with the tribunal and such, like, there's elements that you like and elements you don't like. So I think that definitely would be a great topic for later on, because I know we did our original pandemic special, but who would know this many months later that it's probably time to take another look at that.
Yeah, because again, I think we're, as far as infection rates go and seeing spikes, I think, here in the U.S., we're seeing a fairly decent spike again. And I mean, we just crossed 100,000 in one day recently, or something insane like that. But yet everything's open right now, and we're slowly easing back into or trying to ease back into normal life. I mean, we're talking about live events and wrestling fans in arenas not full to capacity, but people actually going to live events again. And I'm hesitant to say we're going in the right direction. I mean, I don't know.
As you know, I'm a big baseball fan, and go Dodgers. I have to mention the Dodgers just won the World Series, but it was a shortened baseball season, and one of the reasons it was shortened is because pandemic kept it from starting on time. But once the players' union and the major league owners came to an agreement on how we would salvage a season, the main thing that they knew they had to do was finish by November. Like, we have to have a shortened season because we're not going to have our normal season go through the fall, because if you don't get it done by November, the experts were telling them you're probably not going to get a chance to get it done. There's a very good chance you'll get shut down. So as you noted, with all the spikes and things that we're seeing, a month from now, the Thunderdome setup may be the setup, because it might not be as smart a month from now to try to get socially distanced fans into a building. We'll just have to wait and see. The direction we're going, though, you could go to rolling back some of the things that you've loosened up.
And honestly, after January 20th, wrestling may no longer be an essential service. So
might be why they're looking at some other states too for that Thunderdome setup. Who knows? I have one more bit of news, Doug, and this is definitely on the lighter side. And it ties into something we talked about not too long ago either, when we did our special on wrestling cord cutting. But the streaming service Crackle, which is one of the more popular ad-supported streaming services out there. Sony owns it. We didn't mention it in our cord-cutting story because at the time, Crackle didn't have anything related to wrestling. Well, they have an original program that they just announced that is coming up, an original series called Heroes of Lucha Libre. And it premieres November 25th, and it could be an interesting take, Doug. It sounds to me, just from the description, that it's going to be a little more Lucha Underground like, in the fact that there's going to bring in fantastical elements, maybe even more so than Lucha Underground, because it was described that each gladiator is described as sporting their own superpower. So I knew that would get your attention.
I love it already.
So we'll once that happens, we'll maybe talk about it here. But in the meantime, if you guys, those of you who stream and have Crackle or want to download and check it out, as if there wasn't enough wrestling, Doug, for you to try to keep up with.
Right,
another, right?
To keep up with wrestling, trying to get back in the swing of things.
Hey, that's right. That's right. Well, speaking of getting in the swing of things, unless you have any other news items you'd like to add, I'm ready to talk main event.
Let's do it. Let's jump to the main event. Starrcade through the years. It's interesting because when you brought this up, I started thinking, and I racked my brain about this. I don't think I've seen actually, as far as Starrcade Memories, I don't think I've actually seen a Starrcade when it happened.
That was one thing I was going to ask you, because at the time, if I wanted to, maybe we should start with the background for those who you're hearing Starrcade and you might think, well, yeah, I saw Starrcade a couple years ago. That's not the Starrcade Doug and I are talking about, right? WWE owns the name, and they have had sporadic events that they have titled Starrcade. But for those who weren't around back in the 80s or didn't watch Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, the original Starrcade was a product of the National Wrestling Alliance Mid-Atlantic Territory. Doug, holidays were always big for wrestling. Like,
absolutely.
Thanksgiving, Christmas Day, you hear the old guys talk about how they were always away from their kids on Christmas because they were wrestling for someone else's kids on Christmas. It seems kind of strange now. We would think, if Vince McMahon decided he was going to have WrestleMania on Christmas Day, we would all think he was crazy because who's going to watch? It's Christmas, right? Well, they used to have Starrcade, or I guess Jim Crocker Promotions, Doug, actually, if you look at the history of it, it goes back to like at least the 60s that they would have these big Thanksgiving Day shows in the Mid-Atlantic Territory, and that is what evolved into Starrcade. So, folks, Starrcade started in '83, and it lasted all the way. It was an annual event that started around Thanksgiving season, all the way up till 2000. So, we're looking at 18 events here for Starrcade. And Doug, yeah, I didn't see them back in the day either, because if I wanted pay-per-view, I didn't have access to pay-per-view.
Right.
But that actually is a great jumping off point, because I guess we're going to start anywhere. Let's start with that first one, 1983. That one actually wasn't on pay-per-view. Doug, you remember how that one was presented?
Now, is this the one? Because I've got some notes here. Starrcade '83, a flair for the gold. How many? First of all, just a side note. How many Starrcades of these 18 was Ric Flair the main event of? I mean, my
10.
goodness.
10 of 18.
Right?
Yes.
But yeah, so was this the one? Was a closed circuit? Is this how Starrcade started with closed circuit?
That is, yeah. And closed circuit, again, for those of you who are maybe younger or I mean, maybe even not that much younger than us, because closed circuit was a very brief thing. But I know it seems strange now, even before streaming or whatever. I mean, the traditional pay-per-view market was, pretty much established on the model of what they began at Starrcade. But at that time, if you didn't have an antenna coming into your house that picked up something or a cable wire that came in that picked up something, you just didn't see it. So, wrestling back then, and I know it seems strange now because all we think of, I mean, the whole model is based on these big events like Starrcade was then. It was, Survivor Series is coming up, and that's what their Full Gear was last night. It's all pay-per-view driven and has been for the last 35 or so years, 40 years. And it's really all because of Starrcade. That was the first event I remember that was a super event that was available, even though limited availability to others outside of the town it was occurring in. Because as you know, Doug, what happened back in those days, the feuds you saw on TV would be coming to your local town. And that's what they were selling you is like that's how I saw Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat in Logan, West Virginia, of all places, is they're feuding. So they're going to bring that show around and I get to see it. Either that, or if they had a big blow off somewhere, as we talked last week, it's like, meet me Saturday night at the Omni or at the Greensboro Coliseum, or, there was those big shows that you would hear about, but we couldn't see them or have access to them. Well, with closed circuit, Doug, there was the opportunity, right?
This is true. Closed circuit, there was the opportunity. Now, I'm looking here. Was this the situation where you could, people could gather, in a theater, and they would be the closed circuit would be there, so you could have, theaters across the nation, we'll say, or at least across the, broadcast region, where people could go to the theater, buy their tickets, sit in the theater like they're going to a movie or whatever, and then watch the event live as it was. Basically live stream
or an arena.
Yeah.
Because I remember with that first Starrcade, they were making such a big deal about it because it was a first. And every week it was like, we've added new closed circuit locations, and they would name the cities that the closed circuits would. And I remember I would have, 1983, I'm 11 and you're 10. So, I mean, it wasn't like our parents were going to let us go, but I remember they came to Charleston. Charleston was one of the closed circuits locations. I don't know if it was the Charleston Civic Arena, probably. I can't imagine it was the Civic Center. Probably the auditorium, I guess, is what I should say. But yeah, they were coming to Charleston, which means that you would go and sit and watch it on a movie screen. That's what closed circuit was. It was the predecessor to pay-per-view. And in fact, Doug, it wasn't the only Starrcade that was done that way. In fact, I think the first three were done that way, and 87 was the first one that actually switched to the pay-per-view model. So in 83, 84, and 85, you could watch the thing in an arena on a movie screen.
It's very cool. And I'm just looking here, just the locations, Greensboro Coliseum, Greensboro Coliseum, Greensboro Coliseum, the Omni, Greensboro, the Omni. It had its home. It was
a Southern promotion. It was a Southern promotion. And like you said, all those towns, I mean, Greensboro and Omni, I mean, Ric Flair was the man. So there was no doubt who you're going to have in your main event. It's only in the later years of Starrcade, which, it should be noted that the NWA, of course, would sell out to, Jim Crockett would sell out to Ted Turner. And then, the NWA became WCW. And so the latter years of Starrcade as an annual event were WCW events. And those tended to, be past Rick's prime. And so you didn't always get Rick in the main event. But for those first few years, Doug, the ones that I really, really remember, they were all built around the Nature Boy, and especially that first one. I mean, it's right there in the name, a flair for the goal.
I mean, they could have called it Flaircade. I mean, they might as well have.
What do you remember about a flair for the goal?
Man, and here's the thing, because I was racking my brain about this, and I actually had to go back through here and see, it's Harley Race and Ric Flair in a steel cage match, the big thing, the big steel cage match, Harley Race. I mean, Harley Race, Ric Flair. Flair's going in as the challenger here with Harley Race as champion, but.
And I remember they made this so personal. And to me at the time when it was still really new, this was so exciting because one, this was not just your normal feud that they are ending at the Omni for that town. I mean, this is so big they're going to be airing it across the country. And as a kid, I'm like, this is amazing. I wished I could see it. Harley hates Ric Flair so bad and wants him hurt before he goes in. He put a bounty on his head, $25,000 to anyone that can injure. You remember who collected the bounty?
I do not. I do not, man. But I think that is brilliant. Why don't we have more bounties out there? Wait, didn't Corbin do that with like a King's ransom or something recently?
Oh yeah. Yeah, give Baron some credit. I mean, the old school bounty was an actual heel technique that was used a lot back in the day, and it isn't used that very much anymore. But because I remember Harley going around and he'd open up the briefcase and there'd be the $25,000 in it, and the first man that injures Ric Flair, you get this briefcase full of money. And Dick Slater and Cowboy Bob Orton were the two that collected that bounty, and so Ric Flair was going to be going into this less than 100%, which of course what ends up going to happen when you have somebody going in less than 100%. He was totally this was face Ric Flair. I know that mostly we think of Rick as the consummate heel, which of course he is, but in that first one, everyone wanted to see Ric Flair get revenge on Harley Race for having him injured. And even though Rick at this point had already been world champion once, spoiler alert from 1983, but Rick wins on this night. He overcomes, and he said that was more emotional and more meaningful to him, the second one, than the first one, because the first one he wasn't ready. It wasn't a big event. Dusty was the one who lost to him, and Dusty apparently didn't really want to lose. And so to Rick, he really feels like this was the night that made him that consummate world champion that we would see for the next 15 years on pay-per-view. So for that match,
Starrcades.
yeah. Well, for that match alone, I guess obviously you said you didn't see any back when they were around. I didn't either. When do you remember seeing any of at least the Flair for the Gold match?
There's a lot of things in my life that I don't actually remember the first time or when I encountered them, that they're just baked into me at this point.
Yeah.
And a lot of wrestling events are like that. A lot of wrestling memories. I can't say, oh, I saw this then, or wrestling in Star Wars.
They just always were in your life. There wasn't ever a time they weren't.
It happened here or here or here. And sometimes the worlds mix together. Then I've got like Wookiees wrestling Ric Flair in my head for some reason.
And I know for younger wrestling fans, or for fans like us that are modern wrestling fans that are so used to that, well, AEW just had a pay-per-view, WWE has one in 2 weeks, and then there's going to be the NXT one 2 weeks after that. I'm like, you get so overloaded in some ways that it's always pay-per-view season. Mm-hmm. Back before there was WrestleMania, or even WCW didn't, or NWA at the time didn't have the other events either. Like Starrcade was a big deal when that was the only show that had this kind of promotion behind it, and there wasn't a next day. What do we get to next? What happens in 2 weeks? It was like the be all end all at the time. And because of that, it kind of burned a special place in my wrestling memory. So when I did get the WWE network, as an adult, one of the first things I wanted to do was, I'm like, there's way too much content, like all the pay-per-views and things, like you could just get lost, but I am going to make a concerted effort to start with a Flair for the Gold. And because this was WCW, even when they started adding other events as their pay-per-view business grew, that was still their WrestleMania. That was always their big event every year. So I just started watching them year by year. I'm not done. I'm up to 1997, so I got like 3 more to go. But I have, in the time I owned the network, slowly but surely been working my way through all the Starrcades, because I did not see any of them at the time or when I was younger. But they all kind of get jumbled a little bit, of course, as you have 18 of them. But those first 2 or 3 really stick out in my mind this many years later. Not just for, I mean, that Flair race match, we should point out to people, if you haven't seen it, that's considered one of Rick's 5-star classics. So you probably should go and make a point to see that one. But Doug, that if you look at that card for the first Starrcade, that's not the only classic match on that card. I know it's called Flair for the Gold, but there was several memorable matches from that first one.
Trying to pull up the actual card here. I see.
I'll tell you two that I know you're going to know. So Jack and Jerry Briscoe were the NWA World Tag Team Champions, and that night they defended
Youngblood.
Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood.
Man, and a lot of people forget about Jay Youngblood. This was my Steamboat and Youngblood was my tag team when I was a kid. I love Steamboat and Jay Youngblood.
And this was their coming out party, because this was them actually overcoming and doing what Rick did in the main event, is taking that next step to being the world champs.
Yes. Yeah, I was just rolling through here. Steamboat and Youngblood.
And then one that not only stands the test of time as a classic in its own right, it was just is so well known as a classic that it was actually referenced relatively recently on AEW. If you're getting through that list, Doug, you're going to hit it here in a second if you haven't seen it.
I just came across Charlie Brown faced the great Kabuki.
I love the great Kabuki. Charlie Brown from out of town was actually the Boogie Woogie Man in a mask, which was hilarious.
I know, Jimmy Valiant.
But
which is your wrestling trainer, right? Your wrestling coach?
That's right. It's me and Hangman.
Right?
You're still Hangman's gimmick. I still his coach.
Well played, sir. Well played.
But that first Starrcade, Doug, also had probably the most famous dog collar match in the history of professional wrestling.
Wait. I'm not seeing.
Greg Valentine and Roddy Piper.
Wikipedia is seriously letting me down. But Valentine, here it is. Valentine Piper. Oh.
Legit, folks. If you like hardcore wrestling, that's another one that is a classic that you must seek out. And when I say that it stands the test of time, that's 1983. A few weeks ago on AEW Dynamite on Wednesday night, they had a dog collar match, which is not a match you see very often. So, I mean, I know that there's only a few in history that are going to stick out to people, but it was so memorable that it invited Greg the Hammer Valentine to AEW a couple of weeks ago for that historical connection to the brutality of a dog collar match. Because in that match, Doug, legit, Roddy Piper loses 75% of his hearing.
Reading here, it's like, is this legit or is this kayfabe? So
no.
This is legit.
Yeah.
Valentine was awarded the title when the match halted due to the bloody gash over Piper's left ear that rendered him unable to continue and apparently unable to hear.
Yeah.
Wow.
Have you seen that one, Doug?
I'm sure I have. I need to go back and watch, on the network. There's so much wrestling I need to go back and watch right now, for modern and, for, the classics like this stuff. Steamboat, Youngblood, Roddy Piper, Jimmy Valiant, Boogie Woogie Man.
The whole event was good, but those three matches, especially the Briscoes versus Youngblood and Steamboat, and the classic 5-star Flair Harley Race match, and then the one of the more brutal matches that you'll ever see, Greg the Hammer Valentine and Roddy Piper. The first one definitely knocked it out of the park. And Starrcade was always good. They always stacked the show, but that first one, of course, the first of anything is always going to be memorable. But they did not only hold a successful event, it's one that has stood this test of time. They weren't all that great. The next year was good, but I don't know that it was ever better than that first year. The second year, they ended in a match, Doug. Do you remember the $1 Million Challenge?
Hold on, I'm playing catch up. So, it was another closed circuit.
Yep.
Wow. $1 million challenge was to create the illusion that it's real. There's $1 million on the line here. Okay, I like this.
$1 million, and it's Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair again. Rick with one of his classic nemesis, right? Unfortunately, they went with the screw job ending, which was not exactly satisfactory. I don't know, did you get away with that? It was still, you had to, like you said, that was still closed circuit. They're still learning the things that now we take for granted with pay-per-views and stuff that you don't do. You don't have a screw job ending at the end of WrestleMania. You wouldn't leave people hanging as like, oh man, we just paid money and they didn't give us a clean finish for the main event. But yeah, that second one, and I remember Smoking Joe Frazier, I think was the special.
We had a celebrity cameo there. Yep.
Is there any other? I mean, I know we're not going to go through all 18 of them, but
so here's one that catches my eye, and being the geek that I am, there should be more to it. I've lost it here. I think it was. Oh, here we go. 86. Night of the Skywalkers. I have no idea what that is, but I should know that because it's clearly, in my mind, it's clearly a Star Wars reference.
Well, I was actually, when I'm going to talk about, I made some notes about to me, what were the better and or more memorable Starrcade matches. That falls into it because when I tell you what it is, you'll know and you will remember. Doug, do you know what a scaffold match is?
I'm seeing it now. Okay, this is a scaffold. Okay.
That's why they called it the Skywalker match. Play on words, obviously. But for those who don't know, it is probably one of the worst ideas for a wrestling gimmick match. It doesn't mean that it wasn't memorable because it's extremely memorable. But it is literally these two teams fought up on a scaffolding above the ring, and the only way to win was to throw your opponents from the scaffold to the ring. And Doug, this was not the era when people were jumping off of jumbotrons and doing the crazy.
Right. And these are, we're talking about Animal and a Hawk here from the road warrior. These are two big old boys.
Yeah, this isn't Darby Allin doing a stunt. I mean, it's not the days for that.
Little Darby. I mean, even Morton and Gibson. They're not small dudes.
And if you do go back and watch this, what you'll see is 4 grown men crawling on their hands and knees, obviously scared about legitimately falling to their deaths, punching each other very gently and making sure to take care. I mean, it wasn't like big spots. They were, in concept, it was ill-conceived. And at the end of this one, Doug, it's when Jim Cornette gets thrown. That's the big spot where the manager gets himself tossed to the ring. And he walked with a limp for the rest of his life because of it.
I'm sure Corny has lots to say about this night.
None of which we could repeat, but yeah. and because of that, though, it is worth seeing because it is a legendary match for maybe some of the wrong reasons. And Doug, I hate to tell you this, but apparently, maybe this is why the death of the small promotions eventually to Vince McMahon anyway. But they tried it again the next year at Starrcade. It's not as memorable. It's not as memorable a match as what Hawk and Animal had with the Midnight Express. But the next year they did it again with the Rock and Roll Express versus the Midnight Express.
So at this point, they're making the annual event and now starting to give it like an annual attraction with the this whole scaffolding Skywalker thing.
An annual event that actually had also an annual tie-in to it. There is the third year, Doug. I know we talked about years 1 and 2. Was the third year? Is that the Skywalker year?
No, that was 4. The third year is the Gathering, where we had another Flair, Dusty Rhodes for the NWA World Title.
But the match on that one that people still talk about this many years later is probably the at least in the top 2 or 3 most famous I Quit matches in wrestling.
Totally.
Magnum TA and Tully. And I'm sure as a kid you saw the images, Doug, like I did, and I was so happy when I finally, as an adult, saw the whole match. But those brutal images of Tully Blanchard with the leg of a stool, I think it was, that he was like jabbing into the eye of Magnum TA, trying to blind him, and it was another very brutal contest, legit brutal contest, and it was outstanding. That's definitely one of the Starrcade matches that has stood the test of time.
So in the history of Magnum and Tully, anyway, I don't. Where are we in the personal history of them at this point?
Oh.
How much of this is legit? How much of it was work, and how much of it was a shoot? I'm wondering. I have to go back and look, but I mean, because those two have had their issues, like legit issues.
And you know how it goes. A lot of times, the backstage stuff really fuels good on stage chemistry. Tully and Magnum were magic together; they always were. And so, whether it was because they legitimately had problems with one another, or they just, it's Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, right? I mean, like there's just two guys. Whether or not you get along backstage in the ring, you realize that this is my greatest opponent. And when I think of Tully Blanchard as a singles act, I usually think of Magnum TA.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. The early 90s had, like, as far as like as the event started to move on, there was one more classic Flair match. I know that the race match and the Rhodes match, and then of course he had a contest with a Sting, I believe, at one point. But if you want to see one of the last great WCW NWA Flair main events at Starrcade, Ric Flair versus Big Van Vader. That match was Vader worked stiff. Everyone knew Vader worked stiff. And of course, Flair's the best that has ever done it. And so, Harley Race, who at that point in time had become a manager and was managing Big Van Vader, but behind the scenes still had that relationship that he and Rick had always had. Pretty much told Rick, "This, give it back to him. If he potatoes you, just hit him back. He wants you to. It'll make it better." And so Rick went out there, and they literally just beat the crap out of each other. And it is a fantastic contest to watch.
Yeah, another. Yeah, the network should like curate, like classic matches from all. I mean, because they have so much content anyway. I mean, and it's easy enough for us to go through and chase it down ourselves. And well, let's watch this match. Let's watch this match. But it would be great if the network could curate, like the greatest matches of Starrcade. Of course, everybody's going to have an opinion about that. And say, well, why did you leave this match off, or why did you leave that one? Well, why the hell?
Be a start. I mean, it would be a great start to the obvious classics. Everyone's going to probably right off the bat talk about the I Quit match or the dog collar match or Flair, Flair Race. But they probably would do such a thing if they actually had Starrcade as an annual event themselves, because they do now curate a lot anyways, like Survivor Series. I'm sure there's going to be a Survivor Series compilation dropped on the network in the next couple of weeks leading up to that event. But where they don't do Starrcade on a regular basis is probably why they haven't. But I would love to see something like that myself, because it would, I am enjoying going through each of them, but obviously I've had the network since it came out, however many years we're at now, and I'm still not done with all the Starrcades, because I don't get to, when keeping up with all the modern wrestling content, you don't get to go back as often as you think you'd like to.
This is true. There's an obscene amount of great wrestling out there to keep up with just on a weekly basis now.
That's why when I had the first access to all those pay-per-views I had to hear about as a kid but never actually saw, I thought I could easily go down the rabbit hole, or I could just say, hey, this was the NWA's Wrestlemania, and this is the one that I remember most, and what I remember first, I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to complete that series, and then decide what other events I want to pick up.
Right.
But there were some that were not good. They did, as WCW had some pretty lean years before the NWO, Monday Night Wars time. After the boom period of the 80s, the 90s started to get iffy for both the NWA and WWF at the time for ratings and money and things like that. Do you remember the Battle Bowl concept?
I came across this here, and I see it, but I really don't remember Battle Bowl, because I was apparently it was good enough for them to have at least two of them, though.
Well, this is what you were talking about earlier when, like, okay, you're trying to have a signature thing associated with your event. Well, that's why they did this twice. It was the Lethal Lottery. They basically had like a spinning, tumbler, and they pull the ball out and they pull out the wrestler's name, and they would team you with somebody. So it was tag teams. And of course, you know how that goes. It's me and you, we're feuding. So miraculously, we have to now team together. I mean, the way that worked. And the winning team, the two members of the winning team, you had to work together, hopefully, to get the victory. And if you won your tag match, you went to a battle royal at the end of the night. which was a very, I mean, I know you've said before, and I'm kind of, overall, I'm not a huge battle royal fan anyway.
Yeah.
And I like tag team wrestling, but I like my tag teams as actual tag teams. So guys thrown together last minute. So, I mean, the whole concept did nothing for me. And it was, for the most part, they'd have one or two other matches, I think, mixed in there. But for the most part, that was the entire pay-per-view. So that's when, even as someone who, sat down determined I'm going to watch each of these, that's when I started to be like, oh my gosh, they're doing it again. I got to watch another one of those.
Mm-hmm.
Not the best television.
No, and that just sounds like a really overbooked situation too. Where you have this team and this team, and you got to put everybody together. Then yeah, I'm with you there because I do like my tag teams to have actual name instead of two guys being thrown together. And if they dress the same, that's all the more to bring me into it because they're an actual team. Or but never a fan of battle royals or the two guys just thrown together into a team.
And then they turned their biggest event of the year, their WrestleMania, for perspective for those who didn't watch the original Starrcades. They imagine dedicating an entire WrestleMania now to that concept of we're going to randomly throw guys together into tag teams and the winners go into a battle royal at the end.
Right.
I mean, who was booking that? I mean, I don't know who was booking it at that point in time, but that was a horrible, horrible idea. And it was at the time that really, was a struggling one for that Mid-Atlantic territory, probably around the time that Jim Crockett decided he needed to sell to Ted Turner because they were having some issues. Now, they did do one concept, Doug, that I loved, and I know that you would love if you go back and watch it because I didn't have a memory. This probably came around the time that the few years that I felt out of wrestling a bit. Went to college, we didn't pay for cable. And so, I mean, like, I just didn't keep up with the product there for a little while. But they actually had a Starrcade where it was a World Cup style event where the stars of WCW took on the stars of New Japan Pro Wrestling. I mean, New Japan Pro Wrestling is considered the epitome of hard hitting, realistic. And so these legends I've heard of but never saw because I didn't have access to New Japan back in the day. I'm seeing them there wrestling Chris Benoit and I mean these guys. And what you will find interesting though is that the reaction you'd think that they would get nowadays, if you did that nowadays, the audience the hardcore wrestling fans would lose it. They would go nuts. This is really the beginning of the internet. People still did some tape trading. I mean, you didn't see other promotions. So to the audience that's there watching a Starrcade, they're seeing these Japanese wrestlers that they have no idea who they are. So even though they're legends in Japanese wrestling, they're not reacting to them the way that the wrestling fan today would react if you took, an AEW New Japan crossover. I mean, people would go, the hardcores would go crazy to see Okada and Omega again representing different promotions. That's what they were trying to do. And the idea was great.
You see Jushin Thunder Liger versus Chris Benoit.
Yes. Yes, and people didn't know who Liger was,
right?
Because, I mean,
Liger versus Benoit in '95.
Now maybe by that time they might have known who Liger was because, when did Nitro start? It'd been not too very far from there.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, most of the guys didn't have the name power of Liger, even though they're big talent. But yeah, it was interesting when I started to watch that one, okay, it's New Japan. That is awesome. And then I'm seeing the crowd just sit on their hands. I'm like, they're not reacting to any of this. And I started to think they don't know who these guys are. It's the 90s. They don't know. So yeah, I mean, Starrcade, Doug, the legacy of Starrcade. Let's talk a little bit about the legacy of Starrcade. It's been said behind the scenes that the idea that Vince had to do a big super show like WrestleMania really was born out of watching what WCW did with their Starrcade event.
Well, sure.
So you could make the argument that the idea of WrestleMania, or even first we're starting in drive to Charleston, kid, and sit and stare at a movie screen, to now we're coming to you every 3 weeks into your home. I mean, the whole pay-per-view market that we now take for granted that didn't exist back then really owes it to a flair for the gold and the beginnings of Starrcade.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
then
was
next week we're going to talk Survivor Series, and Survivor Series itself has owes a lot to Starrcade.
Yeah. No, was it Survivor Series that actually went head to head with Starrcade, and that was the one that Vince said, if you want my product, you can't run this product, and you have to give us priority, which caused them to move Starrcade.
From 83, from 83 to 87, Jim Crockett Promotion was the dominant promotion in all of the National Wrestling Alliance. And so that, the NWA and the other promoters in the NWA just gave Jim Crockett Thanksgiving Day. Well, of course, Vince McMahon's not going to do that. So in 87, WWF scheduled a pay-per-view of their own, and that was Survivor Series. That was the reason for Survivor Series, was legitimately to compete with Jim Crockett and WCW's or NWA's dominance of the Thanksgiving Day holiday. And they demanded, you're right, they demanded exclusivity because Vince had, a lot of pull by 87. We're talking now, we're into the WrestleMania years. And so, WWF at the time definitely had more clout on pay-per-view anyway, than the NWA did. So, yeah. If given a choice, which one do you want to carry, Starrcade or Survivor Series? You can't carry them both. Most folks sided with Vince, and it forced Jim Crockett from that point on, from that year on. It was always took place in December instead of the traditional November.
But at least that gave us a wrestling Christmas tradition then.
That is true.
Tradition. So it's a win-win. We got Survivor Series and Starrcade there for a while through the years.
So, I mean, really, it is the modern pay-per-view industry, the idea for Wrestlemania, the creation of Survivor Series, which is still taking place around Thanksgiving, which is why we're having this show right now to talk about Starrcade, because we'll be doing Survivor Series next week. A lot of that all goes to the idea. I know everyone gives Vince all that credit, deservedly so, for mortgaging all he had on that first WrestleMania. But had Jim Crockett Promotions not kept Thanksgiving as a holiday tradition in the North Carolina area, who knows who would have done the first Super Show to give Vince that idea.
So was this a Dusty? Was this Dusty's baby, or did it come from within Jim Crockett Promotions or Jim Crockett? Because for some reason I'm trying to tie this to Dusty in my head, but I'm not really seeing anything that jumps out to confirm that.
Yeah, I don't know. The Crockett's did always do a large Thanksgiving Day show. The idea for closed circuit TV, who knows where that? I don't know that I've ever heard where that came from. Dusty was a very creative person and was heavily involved behind the scenes, particularly as years wore on. I don't know about 83 where he was, but he still probably had some stroke. It very well sounds like it could have been a Dusty idea.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was an idea that we may have gone from sitting in the Charleston Arena looking at or the Charleston Auditorium looking at a movie screen to pay-per-views when we would get together as kids and what's for our friends, and everybody put in $10 and we'd get a pizza and watch a pay-per-view, to now we stream it all. But the concept really started with that event.
Yep, I mean, absolutely.
So Starrcade, folks, if you had some Starrcade memories or some favorite matches that we missed, that we need to see, that Doug needs to go see, I'm working through it. If it's after 97, I want to get there. But leave us a comment. Let us know what you think about the legacy of Starrcade and some of your favorite memories and matches from that grand event.
Absolutely. Kevin, are we wrapping up? We ready for the big finish?
Brother, I am ready to move on to the big finish.
Let's do it. I've actually watched wrestling again this week. No, I haven't done all my wrestling homework this week, but I am more caught up than I have been in the past few weeks. So quarantine, I guess, has been good to me for at least that. I can work from home and actually have some wrestling on in the background while I'm currently in quarantine. So
I have no preference as to which we hit first, but we'll get to the 1, 2, 3. What order you want to take them in?
Let's go with our let's just hit our matches and our performers, because I'm going to pull from the AEW Full Gear last night for my match. And I'm gonna hit all three, and I'm just gonna go ahead and knock them out here because I've got a match, performer, and what I'm considering my embarrassment too. So, and two of them are very much tied together. And they're all going to be, from Full Gear. But,
Floor is yours.
of course, Hangman Adam Page as performer, because the story that Page and Omega, this guy right here, have been telling, the long-term storytelling that's involved there, it both ended and really just begun with Kenny winning last night and defeating Hangman, but the subtlety of all the storytelling that they've been doing, I've got to give the nod to Paige. I mean, Kenny Omega is a 7-star performer, and we're finally getting to see that in AEW. It's coming, but I see a much long-term storytelling there. But just the character that Paige is playing, and playing so very well right now, even to the point when the Bucks later on in the night, when Omega comes out, and you've got Hangman just kind of hanging in the tunnel, who he doesn't quite come out. The storytelling is just great there. So kudos to Hangman for that. Definitely performer of the week. Match of the week, I'm going to go with Young Bugs.
I didn't see that one. I saw everything.
Like a Spider-Man themed team, but the Young Bucks and FTR, because they really brought. It could have been so much better in the build-up, absolutely, but they really brought the game there, and I expected FTR to actually pull off the win, which gets me to my embarrassment of the week, because I think it was incredibly out of character for anybody from FTR to go to the top rope, to try and prove something. I think that was a ridiculous way, and it just it was a great match, and in my mind, just soiled by not a screw
on the finish, yeah.
Just like a bad finish to get, it puts the Bucks in a place, and maybe FTR is better chasing the belts now for a little while, but that's usually the face that benefits from chasing the belts. So we'll see. But I mean, maybe the Bucks and Kenny go heel soon, for instead of this. I don't know but just in a nutshell, Full Gear top to bottom I thought was great, but of course.
Surprise!
But I didn't like that screwy ending to the FDR Young Bucks and Adam Page. A year from now, when Kenny's had that world title belt, when Page goes through this arc that his character is going to go through, because AEW will do long-term storytelling. We're going to see Page come out, as champion, probably about next year's All Out. I'm calling it.
Kenny's calling it early.
I'm calling it early. Kenny's got to get that belt and hold on to it for about a year. Page has got to go through a redemption arc, where he first sobers up and starts, getting himself together. But he'll eventually get there, where the cleaner goes full on heel soon. But that's all I'm going to gush about AEW now. I yield the force, good sir.
Well, okay, so I'm with you on a few of these. They're AEW related. So my match of the week I don't need to talk about, because if I'm talking just the match of the week, then absolutely. That we talked Starrcade tonight, Doug, and I actually was thinking of Starrcade in this show as I'm watching, and I'm like, this reminds me so much of like Tully and Arn versus Rock and Roll Express back in the day. It was that kind of like tag team wrestling is the main event. Like whether it's positioned at the end of the card or not, like this is the most important match, the one I was most looking forward to seeing, and it delivered. And yeah, they were absolutely fantastic. So since you picked it for your match of the week, though, I want to just go back and say, if I had my favorite match of the last week and a half, I'm an old man. All right. So as an old man, I occasionally doze while watching my programming. And so Doug on our special Monday show had mentioned about a match that Meltzer and folks had gone on about. And I'm thinking to myself, like, it was really good, but did I really see it all the way I should have? I went back and watched Dragunov versus Walter from NXT UK, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention it as my favorite match of the last not week and a half, but it is definitely a match of the year contender. by the end, these guys were ground like hamburger. I mean, they absolutely were like they just beat the crap out of each other and stiff, and just every slap, every chop, every elbow to the back of the head, you just heard it and felt it, and it was absolutely a work of art.
Well, that's what I
The
was
best
thinking
matches.
when you were talking about, Flair and Vader earlier, and saying, just go
Yeah.
out there, go back to him. I was thinking, well, that's the same kind of mentality they clearly had with that match.
Yeah, and thank you, brother, for calling that one out, because I mean, I saw it and I thought to myself, yeah, it was really good. And I thought, but maybe I need to pay more attention to it. And I went back and watched it a second time and realized that, yeah, I probably dozed during a classic because it was fantastic. My performer of the week. I'm actually I'm going NXT for this one. This is somebody that I've thought about trying to give this honor to before, but this week's segment that he did on NXT was just absolutely the best, I think, of these. But I'm a huge fan of Thatch's Thatch Can. Timothy Thatcher is absolutely
Yes.
killing me right now because he is such a serious character. I remember back, liking him in MLW because he was just an old school, straight up technical wrestler. But I thought to myself when he went to NXT, I'm like, I don't know that the WWE is going to know what to do with him
Right.
because I never saw any character, no charisma. He just was a wrestler's wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And they've actually worked that so perfectly into his gimmick. If you haven't seen it, folks, you have to check these out. It's basically him giving wrestling lessons to his students. And it's very much like Taz breaks down, holds and stuff on commentary. And I love that realistic feel. He's doing the same thing. It's like if you hold him here and you cut off the carotid artery. But of course, the twist is he's doing this with students, and he's a sadist, so he doesn't let go quite in time, and they're like begging for, and he just cinches in a little harder and things. And obviously, at some point, some face is going to give him his comeuppance. But right now, he's basically just brutalizing these kids. He's like the stories you hear about Stu Hart in the dungeon, except they're doing them on TV.
Yes.
It is absolutely one of the highlights of NXT every week. So kudos to Thatcher. Keep doing what you're doing, man, and keep doing that NXT. Thatch's Thatch Can is a highlight. And then finally, Doug, my embarrassment of the week. As we all know, for being old school fans, wrestling weddings don't ever turn out well. Something's going to happen. Somebody's jumping out of that cake. Someone's going into that cake. Blood will be spilled. Somebody's going to be revealed as having an affair with someone at the last minute. But I've never seen a wrestling. You probably know where I'm going with this, even if you haven't seen it.
But I've heard about it.
Impact Wrestling. I'm sitting here and I'm telling my wife, who's in the kitchen at the time, I'm like, hey, it's a wrestling wedding. If something's going to go wrong here, and then suddenly the lights go out, and the groom is shot. Johnny Bravo got shot. Of all the wrestling weddings I've seen go wrong, I mean, you do chairs, you do cookie sheets. There's a reason these are wrestling weapons. When you start bringing actual weapons into it, even if it is over the top campy, like, I think back to the old Brian Pillman Stone Cold days, that wasn't really campy. But I mean, just the specter of real weapons in the world of professional wrestling always takes a little bit of that suspension of disbelief out of it. Like, okay, I can cringe at a cookie sheet going upside of a guy's head, but if it is anything goes and you can't disqualify anybody for any reason, why don't they just bring a gun and shoot somebody? I mean, for obvious reasons. So when Johnny Bravo got shot, I thought that actually surprised me, and I don't think I like it. It's just like, hey, he's sitting there, and now, I mean, they're definitely going campy with it. Tommy Dreamer's going around in a Sherlock Holmes costume every week now, like trying to figure out who shot Johnny Bravo. And it was one of those things that if someone who wasn't a wrestling fan comes in the room and you have to explain to them what's going on, you're going to be embarrassed for being a wrestling fan. So that's my embarrassment of the week.
That's cool, man.
I'm not sure, Doug. It actually may be so bad it's good. It might have turned that corner. I'm not ready to say that yet, but I guess it's memorable. I'll give them that.
Yeah. I mean, people are doing what they can to entertain the masses, I guess.
I give them a little leeway, probably. So I can't say I wasn't somewhat entertained or intrigued by, like, oh, I did not actually see that coming.
Right. Well, hey, that's what it's all about. Surprise. And, I mean, these are rough times, man. They're doing what they can to entertain us.
And we're doing what we can to entertain you guys. So thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Two Bros Wrestling Show. Next week, we're going to talk more Thanksgiving pay-per-view traditions as we move from Starrcade to Survivor Series.
Survivor Series. My goodness, I'm having a hard time keeping up with pay-per-view.
Well, it's a good thing that we have a Survivor Series preview for you, Doug. Watch it and you'll be caught up with all you need to know.
Awesome. Okay, good. Good to know. I'll tune in next week so I can talk about. Wait a minute.
I'll see you there.
Thanks.
See y'all.
Good night.